Thank you for your time today. We'll quickly get through these 250 slides, but no, it's less than a tenth of that. 24 slides, and then open to questions. But appreciate your time. And the agenda that we will go over today is an introduction about myself. I've been in the mold release industry for over 30 years. First as a sales rep, and now I'm a technical manager for our composites group. ChemTrend sells by market segments, which is really to your benefit because we concentrate on the market segments. So you have technical service, sales, lab, all devoted to composites. So very familiar with the culture marble industry. And when I started 30 years ago, everybody was on wax. And so the challenge was to convince people the benefits of semi-permanent. And over the years now, we predominantly, it is semi-permanents. There are people that still use wax. Wax might be a better choice if you're not having high throughput or maybe specialty jobs. But if you have high throughput, a semi-permanent is going to give you the best performance and labor savings, and it's going to be the most economical because of those process and labor savings. I want to talk a little bit about ChemTrend because we're very proud of the company. We are the largest mold release company in the world, 10 times the size of our nearest competitor. Want to talk about the benefits of semi-permanent releases for cast polymer, issues that you might have with a semi-permanent, solutions for those issues, and then talk about products for getting the best gloss in mold building. We have release agents for better tape adhesion if you're using divider bars and have trouble getting your masking tape to stick. And then we want to talk about our latest innovations for cast polymer molding. And talk about mold primers. Mold primers don't have any release capabilities. They protect your tooling, help prolong the mold life of your tooling. Not commonly used in culture marble, but we're gaining more converts. We have a customer that has used the high gloss primer for over 20 years. And now we have one for a matte finish. So if you need matte finish parts, no longer having to sand off that gloss. And then we'll follow up to see if you have any questions. ChemTrend is an American success story in that it was started out of the garage of a Danish chemist and his wife, Piers and Brigitte Lorenzen, out of Howell, Michigan. They were making out of their kitchen a mold release for the polyurethane and also for die casting. Became successful. The neighbors got tired of trucks driving in, dropping off drums of chemicals, so they eventually built a facility in Howell. We've grown over the years to expand globally. We are the only release manufacturer with manufacturing capabilities in other parts of the world: China, Brazil, South Korea, and Germany. And this helps us if the supply chain is down here. We can ship between plants. Two interesting things to note is that not on this is in 1998 we bought the ChemLease product line, and in 2013 we purchased Zyvax. So we have two trade names in the composite line, ChemLease and Zyvax. We were bought in 2004 by Freudenberg. They're a private German company, and because ChemTrend has run well for over 60 years, they let us run fairly autonomously. The benefits of that acquisition by them and for us, here is our, both in Howell, this is our, this is our headquarters, our North American headquarters, with the solvent-based plant in the back. And we also have a water-based plant, so we keep them totally separate, different chemistries. And this building here is all labs. So every market segment that we sell has its own lab. So we can do testing to try and duplicate your molding applications. It's family owned. We're in 50 countries, 9 billion in sales, 47,000 employees, a commitment to customer first philosophy. You customers benefit by Freudenberg's financial strength, additional avenues for research, and as you can see here, the markets we serve are composites, tire, polyurethane, rubber, thermoplastics, die casting, and wood composites was the last industry to emerge when they changed the binder for wood composites, and it needed a release agent where it hadn't before. So that is a fast growing, they have huge presses, and so they get supplied in tankers of mold release. Our solutions, our lines, are the ChemLease and the Zyvacs. You have different kinds of mold releases. You have the semi-permanent technology. You have a conventional, which would be your silicone or your sacrificial, your paste wax, PVA. And then you have internal mold releases, where it's in the resin and blossoms to the top of the mold surface during the curing of the part. And then we have cleaners, and there should, these are the release agents. You always start out with a cleaner. We will talk about mold sealers, which usually are a higher solid version of a release agent, so they have release properties. And then mold primers at the very end. Mold primers have no release capabilities. If you were to lay up on a tool with no sealer or release, you'll stick the part.
So what's the difference between a primer and a sealer?
A sealer has release properties. It aids in the release of the part, helps the provides kind of a barrier between what you're molding and to the tool. The primer is when you have a composite or a machined tool, it's going to have porosity. So primers seal porosity in your tool, and that's important for the aerospace industry. When they're doing a vacuum pull, they have to have vacuum integrity. So our primers are used in the aerospace, even on metal tools. It's not as much of a benefit because metal doesn't have the porosity issues. But on a composite tool, not only do you have the porosity, but you have an uneven surface. And that gives you a hard, smooth surface. It's permanent. The only way you get it off, it's a one-time application, is you have to sand it off.
And it's a spray on?
The matte finishes. The high gloss is a wipe on. And we'll talk about that as the differences between the two. But primers are just to protect your tooling, provide a hard, even surface, prolong the life of your tools. And it can restore old tools that you might have before had trouble releasing off of. And as we talk the different types, and then we have water-based, both in semi-permanent and sacrificial. For culture marble, though, we haven't been able to get water-based chemistry to get that Class A gloss. So for your industry, we're limited pretty much to a solvent-based system. The one thing we do have is water-based cleaners. But we have an entire line of water-based release agents, mold sealers, and primers where it fits in certain industries. But for culture marble and for the marine industry, we do not have a water-based release that will give you a high gloss. We continue to work on that, but technology is difficult to come by. So in most cases, a release system, the stack up, you'd have your tool, your molding material, and that could be a tool either gel coated or non-gel coated. And you always start with a cleaner because you need the surface clean for any of the products to adhere to it. And normal usage would be the mold primer is one time, either 1 or 2 coats. Mold sealer, a couple of coats, and 3 or 4 coats of release agent. Yes.
It's time in between the two. My family's always been done it since like the 70s, but they've always told me time in between two, like 15 minutes in between each coat.
Yes. Our release and our sealers are 15 minutes between coats, and then 30 minutes after the final.
I might have jumped the gun.
Yeah, at room temperature. The primers are very reactive, and they take a little bit longer cure time. Those are 30 minutes, but you double it, 30 minutes between coats in an hour.
And is the cleaner a product that you guys make?
Yes, it is. We have solvent-based cleaners in ChemLease and Zyvax, and we have the water-based cleaners, and we manufacture all our own products. So the mold sealer and the release agent, you get multiple releases. You'll start to get a difficult release, and you do a single touch-up of the release. And you're not doing it again until you start to pull tough, or you've lost the gloss on the mold. Got to repolish it. When you use a buffing compound, that'll take it all off. You then want to follow up with a cleaner to take any buffing compound off, and then primer's already on there, buffing compound doesn't touch that. You then put on, again, the multiple base coats. And what you want every time, repetitive, is a high gloss part that is easy to pull. And with our systems, that's going to eliminate stress cracks in your molds. It'll give you a better mold life, and it'll cut down on your load.
Buildup, does it prevent that?
The primer, if you use the primer, it will. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here are the benefits. Multiple releases. Wax, you can only get one or two at best. Significant labor savings. This doesn't build up. You can go many cycles. Whereas wax, you get that buildup, and you have to strip it off. And then just the application of a wax, you got to buff it on, let it dry, buff it off. So there's a lot of labor involved. Yesterday, I think you saw my demonstration. We have wipe-on only products. You wipe it on, there's a coat, you're done. And so tremendous labor savings. You get better mold life, because if you're not damaging your molds, you're getting easy pulls, the molds last longer. Better mold throughput, you're not having to take them out to clean as often. And improved ease of release. You're obviously improving the ease of release if you're able to get multiple pulls without having to put a coat of release on or a coat of wax every time. And then the less time spent cleaning molds. Potential issues in the early days when we were converting people from wax to a semi-permanent, the vintage semi-permanent mold releases. You had streaking problems, because it used to be all the releases were wipe on and wipe off, and if you worked in too big of an area or you waited too long, it streaks and you lose your good gloss uniform appearance. Durability. Might not get as many pulls as you were hoping to. Tape adhesion for your divider bars. The surface is, you've lowered the surface so well that the tape has trouble sticking, and that's how we do a test to see if we've lowered the surface energy. You put a couple of, you can test the mold when it has nothing on it, and that tape will stick. It'll adhere very well. But as you put each coat on there, you're lowering the surface energy to the point that whatever resin you're molding isn't going to stick to that. So the tape will have trouble sticking. It'll roll back on itself. That shows you that you've lowered the surface energy, gives you the confidence that you're going to release your part. But we have and I'll talk in a minute to the solution for tape adhesion. And then the other problem that you had, you guys don't use a gel coat, but you use a clear coat, and you could get fish eyes in that, and that's from having too much release on there. So to build a Class A semi-permanent for mold building, we recommend ChemLease 2185, And this is a wax product. It's a hybrid. It's wax and it's semi-permanent. This is one of only a few busy slides, but easy way to break it down. The purple is with a Durtech coating sanded at 220 grit. The orange is at 400 grit. This was a mold sealer with a paste wax, 3 coats of each. The middle one is our new 2697. It is a mold sealer that is wipe-on only. Most sealers, because they're heavier solids than a standard release, because of that heavier solids, it makes them harder to wipe on and leave on without buffing, because they used to streak more. But now we have a sealer that you just wipe on. And then the third system was 2697 sealer, same sealer, and the 2185. And you have blue dots are pre-release, and pink dots are tough. And then number of issues of tight releases would apply as opposed to pre-release. And it shows that this is the best system. So the wax, having wax, so if you're using that off a plug, they're very porous. The wax helps seal that, and it's better than just using a standard semi-permanent. You want the sealer and the 2185. So the recommended system, of course, you use a cleaner every time you're starting out. And to get off any sanding, or if it was using a buffing compound, then we'd probably recommend, because it's porous, we'd recommend more coats of sealer than normal, probably 3 as opposed to 2 in molding applications. And then a little bit more, you might only do 3 coats of release off of, once the mold is seasoned, but here, because of the porosity, you may have to go as many as 5 coats. But that's the system for building your molds. Now, we talked about tape adhesion. So you get that mold so slick, or you're taping on a glass tabletop and it's so slick you can't get the tape, using these divider bars. You would use CPRE. And it just it increases the surface energy. Mold release that increases it, it's kind of counterintuitive. But what it does is it takes some of that release and dulls it a little bit enough so where you can get tape to stick. So all you would do with a CPR is, if you coated a glass table and where you're going to put your divider bar, just put a coat or 2 of the CPRE on, and you'll get your tape to stick. So for high volume applications, kind of have some of the same issues. You get in a hurry and you get streaks if you're not, if you're applying it and not, if for the wipe-on, wipe-off products are more typical of streak, but wipe-on only can streak if you apply too heavily. There's some people think if a little bit of mold release is good, more is better. That is not the case, because more, whether you're using wax or a semi-permanent, the more you use, really the more issues you're going to have, probably with buildup or some of these issues of that can come from over applying it. But you want to have durability in a high volume shop. You want to get the most pulls out of the release you can. If you can cut down prep time in any way, that's a time saving and a labor savings for you, so you can build more parts and make more money. And this newest product is a combined sealer release, 2710. I think we're the only one in the mold release industry that has such a product. So you have a release combined sealer that is wipe-on. I showed that one yesterday too. You just wipe it on, let it dry, you're done. There's 1 coat, and 15 minutes between coats. So you have a 1-step product with the addition of a cleaner, but you have a 1-step product now. Now you no longer have to do a sealer and release. And it'll give you a high gloss finish to your parts and help you get multiple releases on all geometries from a sink mold to a shower enclosure. And the way the stack up in this demonstrates two products. You know, you have your cleaner and you have your sealer release wipe on only. 3 to 5 coats. And you can tape test after each coat, and if the tape peels back pretty easily, that resin's not going to stick. That's your scientific test. I mean, they do have dyne pens to measure surface energy, but usually they're not as reliable as doing the old tape test. And that's kind of standard within the mold release industry too. So I'm going to talk about primers. And as the mold primers have not been used as much as we've seen in aerospace, maybe marine, general composites. But we do have users. We have a customer that's used our 2180 high gloss for over 20 years with great success. And I can't say their name because they don't want me to divulge it. They feel they have a competitive advantage, which they might have by using the primer. The composite tools, as I discussed, whether they're molded or machined, they need a primer because you're sealing porosity in the tool and you're providing a hard, even surface. And the primers correct both of that, and we now have a primer that will give you a matte finish. So you don't have to take your molds with that have a good gloss on it and sand off that gloss to get a matte part.
And that's a wipe-on product.
The gloss primer is. The matte is the spray-on only. You do have to spray it. So here's another busy slide. This is measuring surface. RA is a measure of surface roughness. You can see the peaks and valley on this tool. That is 1.68 microns is the measure of the surface roughness. You take our primer, the 2180, and that's what it was before, and then after, you can see it's a lot smoother, not as many peaks and valleys. The second coat will probably take it, but one coat has reduced it to 957 nanometers. That's about a half, almost a 60% reduction in surface roughness from one coat. 2 coats usually will take care of it.
And that's not a problem for highly detailed molds?
When you say highly detailed, meaning different
Shower pans, you've got non-skid patterns and that kind of thing. It's not going to...
No, you can apply it to a non-skid. Mm-hmm. So the primers have no release properties. They're just protecting your tool. So if you, as I said before, you just put primer on, no sealer release, you're going to stick it. But it seals the porosity in the tool. In this case, the 2180 is the high gloss. That is a carbon fiber panel. After one coat, you can see the gloss to where you can see the lights above in the lab in the reflection. So that's one coat on carbon fiber. We have race car companies that take the 2180 after the part has been molded. They use it on their molds, but they coat the part with it because it makes it shinier. Provides a smooth, even surface, protects tooling for a longer mold life, restores older damaged tooling. So you might have some tools that have, you're having tough releases, you put some primer on there, give it an even surface, hard surface, and it'll improve the release. I will say that the first generation was 117, and it was a wipe-on, wipe-off. The 2180 is wipe-on only, but it's not as user-friendly as a sealer or release. You have to get some experience in it. We suggest you have one guy in your mold shop be the only one that apply the primer. Give him the experience, let him do it. Because you're only putting it on a mold once. But the problem is it cures fairly quickly. So you have about 10 minutes if there's a streak. You want to do overlapping areas, just wiping it on, a light, even wet film. If you were to get a streak, it's because you have too much in one area, the rag was too saturated, or if you had a run. So you got to quickly come back and wipe it off and move it around. Because otherwise, if you let that cure in there, the only way you get it off is you have to sand it off. So through trial and error, though, I've found that sometimes it's easier, instead of using the feature of wipe on, leave on, just wipe it on and come back with a dry cloth following it. And that takes off any excess, gives you a little bit easier chance of not getting a streak. Do overlapping lines, so you're not missing it anywhere. So this would be the recommended system on your tooling. If you were to use a primer, use a cleaner. 1 to 2 coats. 2 coats usually does it. A lot of people go with 1 coat because there's some of the times if they are applying too heavily and they apply that second coat too heavily, then they might have some issues and they've ruined the good finish that they had on the first coat. So it all depends. As long as you can get a good hard smooth surface high gloss, you might get away with 1, but usually 2 is all you need. We do have a different primer for highly porous materials like tooling board and 3D printed, and you could use the 2180, but you just have to use more coats because of such a highly porous material. But that's not so much within your industry. And then the release agent, use the combined sealer release, wipe on, wait 15 minutes, and then you apply your next coat. 30 minutes after the final.
Are you talking about doing that every time that you redo, that you've used that, you determine your time to recoat?
Primer never has to be put on again.
Huh?
Primer does not have to be.
I'm not talking about the primer, I'm talking about the cleaner primer. I understood you only had to do the release. Once you had that mold set up one time, then you only had to come back and do release coats.
Well, if you were using this 2710 is a combined sealer release, but we would recommend if you strip your tooling, you use a sealer. So you would apply the sealer, 2 coats of sealer and three or 4 coats of release every time you strip the tool.
Yeah, but I don't strip my tooling every time. I'm just going back what I was told when I started using this. That I should get 20 pulls before I had to recoat. This was years ago. And when I recoated, I only had to do the release. I didn't have to.
Oh, correct, correct. Yes. So you start out with a clean mold. If you're not using primer, and you use a sealer and a release. In this case, I'm just talking about 2710 because it's a combined sealer release. But what you would do is you get 20 pulls, you only put a single touch-up coat of release. You should get another, 20 pulls. There will be a time when you strip the mold, and when you do strip the mold, if you had primer on, using a buffing compound, that's not going to take it off. But it will take off sealer and release. So that's why once you strip the mold, you do put sealer and release. But as far as touch-up coats, you're right. You only put on 1 coat. And then here's the matte primer. It's basically you're making a mold so that your mold will come up with a matte finish so that once you have that mold, every part you come off of that mold will have a mold. It will be replicated in a matte finish. It has to be sprayed, but a primer can be put on a splash mold to make a mold, or you can use it on a plug. And you would spray it. It is spray applied only. You would spray it either to the plug or to the splash mold, and then you make a mold off of that, and then that will give you a mold that produces matte parts. So it's a one-time use for this because that matte finish will be on that mold until you sand it off. And This is at one coat, and you can't really see, yeah, you can see a little bit of a halo of the light from above, but it's pretty good matte finish, pretty uniform. And then you see it after 2 coats. Now you could put more and you get even more of a matte finish, but usually 1 to 2 coats will give you that matte finish. And you can use the 2710 or the 1FS that give you a high gloss, but it's not going to get, you know, it's not going to bring the gloss up. I mean, when you put this matte finish on the step meter, it's from about 0 to 5. All of a high gloss mold release is going to do is maybe bring it up by 1 or 2 points. So it's still going to be in the matte range. You don't need a matte mold release sealer. So this way you have a sealer, not sealer, release. This way you have a release that you can use. You don't need a special release. It's just the primer that you do one time. And so it's a tremendous labor savings of what you have to do with a shiny mold.
Can you take the other primer, go over it, and bring it back to a gloss finish?
That's never been asked before, and I don't know if, I suppose it could. It might, I would think it would increase the gloss if you are going to do it, but you're almost better just starting with a new mold than trying to do that, because I think you'd have to use too many coats of the 2180.
What do you mean start with a new mold? So once that's sprayed on there, you can
Well, make a new mold. I mean, make a new mold is what I.
just strip right off there after you're done with the matte finish.
You could sand it. You could sand it off, and then, you know. But his question was, can you put the 2180, the high gloss, over the matte to restore it? You would want to sand it, because you'd have to put too many coats of the 2180 to get that gloss back.
So for best practices, once that's a matte mold, leave it as a matte.
Leave it as a matte mold and build a different mold. And then the stack up. Remember, this is building a mold, so you go back to that 2185 that has that wax in it. Use the cleaner. Primer matte finish, 1 to 2 coats. First of its kind. Spray. This was developed for the wind blade industry, for one of our wind customers. They don't want this blade reflecting sun blinding drivers by, you know, where they have wind farms by the freeway. So it was first perfected with the wind blades, and now we found a usage within culture marble. So first of a kind, nobody has anything like it. Huge time savings, 1 to 2 coats. That's the only time you'll have to use it. It's expensive. It's $500 a gallon, but you use it once. How many hours of labor does it take you to sand that and get your matte parts? So it's definitely worth if you have a demand for matte parts. And then 3 to 5 coats of the 2185, and you've built yourself a mold with matte finish. Yes?
Does this product work on glass tables?
Probably not, because I would think, because glass really, it might have a hard time wetting out. We've never tried it on glass. I would have to, if you give me your card, I can get back to you to see after I talk with the lab if it's possible. But I have a feeling it might not work, because they had trouble wetting out evenly to get you a uniform surface. We wouldn't recommend putting the gloss primer on glass either. You know. And then that's it. So we got through those 250 slides pretty quickly. I think I'm on time. And I really appreciate you guys' time. If there's ever an interest in looking at these products, here's my phone number, my email. We're glad to answer any questions you have, and if you'd like us to come out, we'll come out with your local distributor and give you a demonstration. Any questions? Or we covered most of them.
Yeah, those instructions for the coating on the website.
If you have the data sheet number, I mean the primer was 2192, the gloss primer is 2180. You can get those data sheets on chemtrend.com.
You told me to
Mm-hmm.
Do you put release after?
Probably should if you're not going to have. So if you're doing multiple jobs and you're moving the bars around where you did have the CPR, put a coat of your release over the top of that. Yep, to lower the surface energy again.
What's the best way to clean tooling wax off?
Buffing it. We have cleaners that are solvent based, but the problem is if you have on a mold there's so much wax built up on there and maybe even into the tool. The best way is to
I'm talking about wax you put around a custom vanity top mold. You pull it and leave some of that mold. What's the best way to get that?
I would take a solvent based cleaner and clean. Mm-hmm.
That won't affect the release.
It'll take some of it off. So if you get some of the wax, over onto the release area, you would take that off with some cleaner, and then probably go back over it with just a single coat of release in that area. But if you start with clean molds, if you give us a brand new mold, you could end up having to get rid of flange wax because if you keep the flange is made of the same fiberglass that the mold is, and it has the same gloss initially. If you keep the mold in good shape, you'll never have to use flange wax again.
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah, that's take it to it all. Yeah.
So many chips out of the edges of our mold.
Yeah, now we would say you're not, if they're so banged up, stay with the flange wax, on there. But if you convert to our system with every new mold you go to, we can keep it in a high gloss appearance, especially if you put the primer on it. Primer will also reduce your styrene buildup. It won't let it, get into the tool.
How long has the primer been around?
Oh, the MPP 117 was developed in the 80s for aerospace, and the 2180 probably came around in the early 90s. And then we've come up with a water-based primer, but it won't give you the gloss finish, and then we came up with a primer for very high porosity materials like low density tooling board, 3D print, and monolithic graphite.
Thanks, Russ.
I appreciate your time today, guys. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your show. Yes, question?
The primer, when you say you apply it, does it take away some smaller scratches? Does it fill it? Like you're saying?
Yeah, it'll it's not going to fill it to the point where if you have a divot, but if you have a scratch, it should cover that blemish. Yeah.